I used to be a respected vocal teacher with hundreds of students, but one day I discovered my own son and daughter secretly signed papers to institutionalize me just to steal the house I bled to build for them. What they didn't know is that I was more lucid than ever. If you think this is just another family story, you're wrong. Subscribe now for more powerful and emotional true stories from us. The mornings in Lucinda Hart's home always began with silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that pressed against the walls like fog, heavy, uninvited, and impossible to ignore. The house was a 2-story red brick structure on the corner of Ashmore and 5th, with ivy crawling up one side like it had lost its way and decided to settle. Lucinda had lived here for over 4 decades. She and her husband Milton had raised Naomi and Clark within these walls. Once the place had been filled with music and laughter. Now it was filled with echoes. Lucinda was 74. Her hair, once the color of cinnamon bark, had faded into soft white curls she pinned into a bun every morning. Her voice, though weaker now, still carried the clarity and warmth of the music teacher she had been for nearly 35 years. But there were no more students to correct, no more voices to harmonize, no applause after choir recitals, just the long stretch of hours between breakfast and dusk. She had her routines: breakfast at 7, a walk around the garden at 8, tea by 10. The garden was wild now. Milton had loved tending to it, but since his heart gave out 7 years ago in the middle of mowing the lawn, Lucinda had let nature take back her claim. She didn't have the knees to pull weeds, and didn't have the heart to replace him out there. On this particular Monday, the sky was a pale gray, and the wind moved through the trees like it was whispering secrets. Lucinda sat by the window with her cup of tea chamomile with a splash of honey and watched the neighborhood wake up. Children were being herded into minivans, dogs barked, tires crackled against gravel. She reached for the photo frame sitting beside her. It was the one with Milton holding baby Naomi in one arm and little Clark clinging to his leg, both of them giggling. Lucinda ran her thumb over the glass. Naomi hadn't visited in 3 weeks, though she'd texted 2 days ago. "Hey, Mom, any chance I could stop by to grab the bank statement you mentioned? Also, we're a little tight this month just till Clark pays me back. Can we chat?" Lucinda hadn't answered. She didn't know how to say, "You only come when you need something." Clark hadn't been to the house in over 2 months. He worked in real estate now, big projects, high-rises, commercial units. His voicemail always sounded rushed, distracted. Lucinda missed them. Not the adults they had become, but the children they once were. Naomi with her endless curiosity and musical ear. Clark with a wild laugh and scraped knees. When had they slipped through her fingers? When had she stopped being Mom and become a footnote in their schedules? That evening, as the shadows grew longer across the floorboards and the tea had long gone cold, Lucinda sat on the floral couch in the living room. The wallpaper behind her was peeling near the corners, and the faint scent of old books and lavender filled the air. She'd left her phone on the coffee table to charge. It was Naomi who called first. Lucinda didn't move. The phone lit up once, then twice. On the 3rd ring, it went to voicemail. 30 seconds later, the phone lit up again. This time it was Clark. Curious, Lucinda leaned forward. The names of both her children flashing back to back felt odd. She hesitated, then picked up the phone. She didn't mean to answer it, but her fingers brushed the screen just as the call connected. What she heard froze her in place. Clark's voice was calm, almost clinical. "She's still in that house. I thought you'd filed the papers last week." Lucinda's breath caught. Naomi's voice came through, next flat but urgent. "I'm working on it. The doctor's note takes time. I have to make it look legitimate. You know how she is still teaching herself arias like she's performing at the Met." Lucinda's grip tightened around the phone. "Naomi Clark said we need to move on this. The buyer's ready. Once she's admitted, it's just a matter of pushing the signature through. The sooner she's in a facility, the better, before she changes her will again." There was silence for a beat. "I'm not a monster, Clark," Naomi said, quieter now. "She's my mother, and Milton was our father," he snapped, "and he'd want us taken care of too. She's not in her right mind anymore. You know that. She talks to the damn furniture. You want her to fall down the stairs and blame us." Lucinda's hand trembled. Her teacup clinked against the saucer. She hadn't spoken to furniture. She'd spoken to Milton's chair. That wasn't madness, that was grief. "Look," Naomi continued, "I'll get the papers notarized this week. I just need her signature. If I nudge the conversation right, I can get her to sign without her noticing." Clark chuckled. "Don't take too long. I've got a developer breathing down my neck. That house is worth more gutted than standing. It's a relic. A relic." Lucinda slowly put the phone down. Her heart beat in her ears. Her legs felt heavy. She stood up only to realize she was shaking. In that moment, something inside her shifted. Not with fury, but with focus. Everything she had ignored, every doubt she had swallowed about their distance. Their evasive visits, the small coldness that had crept into their voices over the years, it all made sense now. It hadn't started that day. It had started long ago. She remembered a year ago when Clark had offered to streamline her finances and suggested she transfer the deed into a family trust. She remembered Naomi's insistence on helping organize medications and her surprise when Lucinda refused to stop using her old handwritten chart. She remembered how both of them had started using the phrase, "when you're no longer in the house." It was always casual, a joke, a someday, but it hadn't been a joke. They had been planning this, slowly, quietly behind her back. Lucinda didn't cry. Instead, she walked upstairs to the spare bedroom, the one that used to be Naomi's. It still had the old twin bed and a corkboard full of faded photos. She opened the drawer under the desk and pulled out a notebook, plain black, spiral-bound. It was her mind journal. She'd started it 6 months ago after she'd caught herself forgetting a neighbor's name. It terrified her. So she began tracking her thoughts, her memory lapses, her dreams. It wasn't just to reassure herself. It was proof that her mind was still hers. She flipped through the pages, pausing over one from last week. Woke at 6:12 a.m., remembered lyrics to O mio babino caro without hesitation, dreamt of George. He was young, smelled of cedar. Lucinda closed the notebook and held it to her chest. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't senile. She was under attack. She made a decision then, quiet and sharp. She would not be pushed out of her home. She would not be silenced. And above all, she would not be erased. She descended the stairs, each step slow but steady. At the base, she turned toward the hallway closet and pulled out a small box filled with cassette tapes, her old recorder, and folders of saved documents. Her teaching files, her marriage license, Milton's death certificate, her original will. Then she opened the kitchen drawer and pulled out a small digital voice recorder gifted by one of her old students for her retirement. She clicked the record button. The red light blinked. Lucinda Hart stood alone in her kitchen, and she began to build her wall of truth. One brick at a time. Lucinda Hart didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed with the covers pulled up to her chin, the room around her cast in dim gold from the old street lamp outside. Shadows moved gently along the walls, but her mind was wide awake, focused and electric. The voices of her children replayed over and over, looping like an ugly melody stuck in her head. Once she's admitted, just need her signature. She stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours. She didn't cry. Not yet. That would come later. For now, there was a new sensation taking shape, sharp, cold, almost surgical. Lucinda had always been someone who believed in grace under fire. It was how she'd survived 35 years of teaching teenagers to sing scales and arias without losing her voice or her mind. Now that composure had to serve a different purpose. By the time the sun pierced through the curtains, Lucinda had made a plan. She got up earlier than usual, dressed deliberately in her favorite navy cardigan and matching flats. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured her tea, but she steadied them with a deep breath. There was no room for nerves now, only action. She placed the digital voice recorder on the corner of the kitchen table, slid a fresh battery into it, and tested the button. Click, red light on. Click, red light off. Simple. The first step was documentation. If they wanted to paint her as unstable, she would give them proof of the opposite. Pages and pages of it. She pulled a clean yellow legal pad from the drawer and began writing, carefully logging every detail she could remember from the night before the call. The words, the tone, even the timestamp on the phone. Then she moved to the back of her filing cabinet where she stored receipts, letters, insurance bills, and handwritten notes from her doctor visits. Each item was reviewed, logged, dated. Her mind was sharp, but she knew that wasn't enough. In a world of lawyers and signatures, emotions didn't win. Evidence did. 2 hours later, her kitchen table looked like a war room. Medical documents, insurance records, prescription histories, notes from her therapist. Everything intact, everything methodical. She was halfway through organizing the pile when the mail arrived. She almost didn't check it until something in her chest tugged her toward the front door. The mail slot had dropped a small stack of envelopes onto the hallway rug. Among the usual suspects, utility bills, catalogs. A political flyer was a plain white envelope with a printed label, Blue Ridge Hills Senior Care Center. Lucinda's breath caught. She tore it open with deliberate slowness as if her fingers were afraid of what they might find. Inside was a short letter. Dear Miss Lucinda Hart, we are writing to confirm receipt of your admission file submitted by your next of kin with a tentative move-in date scheduled for the 15th of next month. If any personal or medical concerns arise prior to your transition, please contact our intake department. We look forward to welcoming you to Blue Ridge Hills. Her knees buckled slightly. She held onto the doorframe to keep from collapsing. For a moment, the walls around her seemed to blur tilt like a stage before the curtain rises. She read the letter again, then again. Next of kin, tentative move-in, transition. Her children hadn't just talked about putting her in a care home. They had done it, behind her back, without a word, with signatures apparently that carried more legal weight than her own consent. The betrayal was no longer a fear, it was a fact. Documented, branded, sealed with a return address and a smiling logo. Lucinda walked to the dining room and set the letter down next to the other files. For a long time she stared at it as though it might vanish if she looked long enough. But it didn't. Of course it didn't. Instead, she picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts to find the name she hadn't called in years. Dr. Maya Kellerman, geriatric psychiatrist. Maya had been a parent at one of Lucinda's last schools, a bright, no-nonsense woman with blunt gray bangs and eyes like quartz. Lucinda remembered her because she had always stayed late after choir practice listening as her daughter rehearsed solo parts. She was someone Lucinda could trust. She dialed. Maya Kellerman. Maya. Dear Lucinda said, her voice steadier than she felt. This is Lucinda Hart. There was a pause. Lucinda. Oh my God, it's been ages. Are you all right? Lucinda hesitated. I need a favor, a professional one. 3 days later, Lucinda sat in the chilly office of Dr. Kellerman. The room was modern and warm, filled with plants and a giant canvas of abstract trees behind the desk. Lucinda clutched a small leather bag on her lap, inside of which were carefully prepared documents, her mind journal, and a sealed envelope containing the Blue Ridge Hills letter. Maya sat across from her, hands folded, her face a mixture of concern and professionalism. You're sure you're ready for this? She asked gently. Lucinda nodded. I'm not here to convince you I'm all right. I'm here so you can tell anyone who doubts it that I am. Dr. Kellerman smiled faintly. Then let's begin. The assessment lasted nearly 2 hours. It was more than just memory games or reciting the date. They talked about literature, the nuances in Italian opera, current events, even economic policy. Lucinda's answers were clear, her attention focused. By the end of it, Maya leaned back and gave a soft whistle. Well, Lucinda, I have patients 30 years younger who couldn't recite full verses of Yeats on cue. Lucinda allowed herself a small smile. It's the music. Keeps the mind alive. Maya handed her the signed evaluation form. You have no cognitive decline. You're lucid, articulate, and entirely capable of independent living. I'll notarize this today and send an official copy to your lawyer if you'd like. Lucinda felt something loosen in her chest. Not joy, not relief, but the beginning of something powerful, agency. Back at home, she added the new evaluation to her growing war chest of documentation. She began recording all conversations. When Naomi called just to check in, Lucinda was pleasant, measured. She said nothing about the letter. She simply listened, asked questions, let Naomi talk too long, too confidently. Naomi mentioned how hard it was to balance work and family, how she was just thinking about what's best for Mom. Lucinda let the tape roll. Clark called 2 days later, casually slipping into conversation the idea of streamlining Mom's estate in case something happened. Lucinda pretended not to notice the implication. The recordings stacked up, every voicemail, every stray comment, every apology. Wrapped in a condition, it all went into a digital folder she labeled Winter Documents. Winter was always a season of survival. Then came the second envelope. It arrived on a Thursday morning. Lucinda had just finished dusting the bookshelves when she saw the postman drop something thick into the slot. It was a large manila envelope addressed to Ms. Lucinda Hart, but the return label read, Law Office of Douglas and Graves. Inside was a consent to relinquish power of attorney form, pre-filled, with her name, with Naomi's listed as primary executor. Lucinda read the document 4 times. There was a post-it note on it in Naomi's handwriting. Hey, Mom, just sign this whenever you can. It's standard stuff. Just helps us handle the bills more easily. We'll talk soon. Love you. N. That was the moment Lucinda Hart stopped pretending. She sat down at the table, folded the document, slid it into a fireproof folder under the stack labeled legal. Then she turned to the recorder, pressed record, and said clearly, As of this moment, I, Lucinda Amelia Hart, declare full mental capacity. I am in possession of all critical faculties and have not authorized any person, including, but not limited to Naomi Hart or Clark Hart, to act on my behalf in legal or medical matters. Any document suggesting otherwise is forged, manipulated, or submitted without my knowledge or consent. She paused, then looked up. Out the window, a neighbor passed by walking a dog. Life went on. But inside that red brick house, the walls had begun to tremble. Not with fear, but with resistance. The first crack had opened, and Lucinda Hart, teacher, mother, widow, was going to use it to tear the whole damn wall down. Ellie didn't trust her mother anymore. She didn't know when that started exactly. Maybe it was gradual, like water slowly seeping through wood. You only noticed once the foundation began to rot. It wasn't that Naomi was cruel. She was just careful, always measuring her words, always performing politeness with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Ellie had grown up watching her mother charm neighbors' clients, even her own husband, with that precise, practiced grace. But lately something underneath it had started to crack. It had begun a few months ago. Naomi would talk about Lucinda, Ellie's grandmother, with a bitterness that felt foreign. She's not herself anymore, Naomi had said one night while chopping vegetables. Keeps forgetting things. I asked her to send me a copy of her tax form, and she said she already did. 3 times. She's slipping. Ellie hadn't responded. She'd spent enough time with her grandmother to know that Lucinda forgot nothing. The woman remembered the lyrics to Italian operas she hadn't sung in 50 years. She remembered Ellie's class schedule better than Ellie did. She remembered her late husband's favorite jazz record, not only the title, but the track number of his favorite sax solo. So no, Ellie didn't buy it. Still, she kept her doubts to herself. At 17, Ellie had learned the art of silence. When adults underestimated her, they said things they shouldn't, and Naomi had been saying a lot lately. She needs care. A home with supervision, Naomi told her father on the phone one evening. Ellie had stood behind the kitchen door, pretending to look for her charger. You know how much that house is worth. The taxes alone. She trailed off when she saw Ellie. Now today, Ellie stood on the steps of her grandmother's red brick house, clutching a canvas tote and a small bag of scones from the bakery down the street. Her mother didn't know she was here. She'd said she was going to the library, which wasn't technically a lie. She just planned to make a stop first. Lucinda opened the door before Ellie could knock, as if she'd been waiting. Ellie, she said, her smile soft and real. You didn't say you were coming. I wanted to surprise you, Ellie shrugged, lifting the bag. I brought lemon scones. Lucinda stepped aside. Well, that's enough to pardon any unexpected arrival. Come in. The house smelled the same as always, old books, black tea, lavender. There was a slight hum in the air, not from electronics, but from presence. This was a house that had seen life arguments, songs, tears, and somehow it held on to all of it. Ellie stepped inside and glanced around. The living room was neat with doilies on the side tables and sunlight pouring across the floorboards. But there was something different, a tension in the air. Or maybe it was just in Lucinda herself. Her movements were precise but too quiet, like she was listening for something. Lucinda took the scones into the kitchen. Ellie followed, dropping her bag near the couch. As she did, something caught her eye, a sliver of black beneath the armchair. She bent down casually, pretending to tie her shoe. There, half concealed by the leg of the chair, was a small digital voice recorder, the kind reporters used, or detectives. Ellie didn't touch it, just stared for a moment. Lucinda's voice drifted in from the kitchen. "Put the kettle on, will you, sweetheart? The cups are still on the tray." Ellie stood slowly. "Sure." They sat at the kitchen table with their tea, lemon scones between them. For a while they talked about school, Ellie's upcoming exams, the girl in choir who kept singing flat. It was easy, warm, like old times. But Ellie couldn't stop thinking about the recorder. She looked at her grandmother now, not just as grandma, but as a woman who was hiding something. Halfway through her second scone, she set down her fork. "Grandma," she said carefully, "do you think Mom worries about you?" Lucinda looked up. Her expression didn't change. "I think she believes she's doing what's best," she said calmly, "though I'm not sure she knows what best means anymore." Ellie hesitated. "She says you forget things." "Do you think I do?" Lucinda asked. "No," Ellie said instantly. Lucinda's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Then there's your answer." A silence fell between them, not awkward but heavy. Then Lucinda reached across the table and placed her hand over Ellie's. Her skin was cool, papery, steady. "I'm going to tell you something," she said quietly, "but only a part of it, for now." Ellie nodded, her throat tight. "There are things happening that your mother and uncle would prefer I didn't know about. But I do know, and I'm keeping records." Ellie didn't ask why, didn't ask what. Instead, she leaned in. "I saw the recorder." Lucinda's hand didn't move, but her eyes did, studying Ellie's face for fear or judgment or hesitation. There was none. "I know," she said. "Are you recording, Mom?" "I'm recording everything." Ellie didn't flinch. "Good." Lucinda tilted her head slightly. "You're not surprised." Ellie looked down at her tea. "I've been hearing things, bits and pieces. She thinks I don't notice, but I do. She underestimates you. Everyone does." Lucinda sat back in her chair. For a long moment they just looked at each other. Two women from different generations, both quietly betrayed by the same blood. Finally, Lucinda spoke. "What do you know?" Ellie bit her lip. "She's been talking to someone about selling this house. She says you'd be better off in a place with supervision. But she always says it like the house is already hers." Lucinda nodded slowly. "That sounds about right." "Is it?" Ellie's voice wavered. "Is she trying to put you in a home?" Lucinda didn't answer right away. Then she said, "I received a letter from Blue Ridge Hills Senior Care Center, confirming my admission." Ellie's face drained. "She already applied." Lucinda handed her the envelope. Ellie read the letter, her fingers tightening with each word. "She didn't even tell you?" "No." That's insane," Ellie said. "That's illegal, isn't it?" Lucinda gave a small, bitter smile. "It's not illegal to prepare, but forging a signature is." Ellie looked up sharply. "She forged something. I suspect she's trying to. I haven't let her near my documents, but she's persistent." Ellie gritted her teeth. "She's always talking about how everything is for the good of the family, but she means her version of it. She thinks everyone else should just fall in line." Lucinda sighed. "I don't hate your mother, Ellie. I know, but I don't trust her anymore." Ellie swallowed. "Me neither." They sat in silence for a moment. The clock on the wall ticked. Then Lucinda leaned forward. "I need your help," she said, "but only if you want to. You're young. You have your own life. I don't want to pull you into something that will make things harder for you." Ellie didn't hesitate. "I'm in." Lucinda blinked. "Just like that." Ellie grinned faintly. "You didn't raise a coward, Grandma, and neither did she." Lucinda smiled, and for the first time in weeks it reached her eyes. They made a pact then and there, quiet, unspoken, but real. Ellie wouldn't tell her mother she'd been here. Lucinda wouldn't push her for more than she was ready for. But when the time came when things escalated, Lucinda wouldn't be standing alone. As Ellie got up to leave, Lucinda handed her a slip of paper. "What's this?" "A name," Lucinda said. "And a number. A lawyer. I may need you to deliver something to her, in case I can't." Ellie nodded solemnly. "Got it." At the door, Ellie hesitated. "Grandma." "Yes." "Why didn't you tell me before?" Lucinda looked at her for a long time. "Because I needed to be sure you saw me," she said softly. "Not just as the old woman your mother complains about, but as who I really am. Ellie reached out and hugged her tightly. I've always seen you, she whispered. Lucinda closed her eyes. So it began. Not with a fight, not with lawyers or papers or confrontations, but with a girl and her grandmother, and the quiet decision not to be silent anymore. It started with a coffee mug and a half-open bedroom door. Ellie hadn't meant to go snooping. That was never the plan. She just wanted to return the mug her mother had left in the car, but when she stepped into Naomi's room intending only to drop it off, her eyes landed on the laptop glowing on the desk, unlocked, still warm. A document sat open on the screen. Sale agreement. 49 Lambert Street. Her breath froze. That was her grandmother's address. The red brick house. The home where Lucinda had raised her children and buried her husband. A house that held decades of songs and grief in lavender-scented rooms. Ellie glanced over her shoulder. The hallway was quiet. Naomi was downstairs talking on the phone. She had maybe 5 minutes. She crept forward, sat down, and touched the trackpad. The document scrolled gently under her fingers. There it was. A full purchase agreement, dates, clauses, buyer names, and a signature at the bottom. Lucinda A. Hart. Scanned, pasted into a digital box, and beneath it the date was just 2 weeks ago. Ellie's hands trembled. She knew her grandmother's handwriting. That was close, but it wasn't hers. It was a mimic. Slanted just slightly wrong, too uniform, too clean. She quickly took photos of the entire document with her phone. Then just as she heard Naomi's voice nearing the hallway, she closed the file, backed away, and slipped out of the room, heart pounding like a war drum in her ears. That night she returned to Lucinda's house. She didn't knock. She let herself in with the spare key under the planter, just like she had 1,000 times as a child. Lucinda looked up from the armchair when she walked in. Ellie, I need you to see something, Ellie said, her voice tighter than she expected. She pulled out her phone, swiped to the photos, and handed it over. Lucinda adjusted her glasses and stared at the screen. She didn't speak, didn't blink. Ellie watched her carefully. Finally, Lucinda looked up. I never signed this, she said. Her voice was even. I've never seen this document in my life. It's on Mom's computer, Ellie whispered. Open, like she wasn't even trying to hide it. Lucinda studied the signature again. They traced me, she said quietly. Scanned something I signed long ago and lifted it. Ellie's stomach twisted. That's illegal, right? Yes, Lucinda replied, her fingers tightening. If it's used to authorize a transaction I didn't consent to, it's fraud. Identity fraud. Real estate fraud. So what do we do? Lucinda stood, walked to the cabinet by the window, and retrieved a manila folder already thick with documentation. She added Ellie's photo printouts to it. Then she paused. We need someone who understands how to fight this. Someone with both the law and the guts. Ellie frowned, like a lawyer. Yes, Lucinda said, but not just any lawyer. She walked to a bookshelf and pulled down an old yearbook. Marla Bennett, she murmured. Graduated 15 years ago. Alto soprano, second row in choir. Smart. Compassionate. Parents divorced junior year and she still got a scholarship to Columbia. She flipped through the pages, stopping at a photo of a girl with fierce eyes and wild curly hair. She became a lawyer, Ellie asked. Family law, Lucinda said. I saw her name in the newspaper last spring. She just opened her own practice. Ellie leaned in. Think she'd help you. Lucinda stared at the photo. She sang Puccini when she was 16, crying the whole way through. If she still has that same fire in her belly, yes. The next morning, Ellie made the call. Marla Bennett answered on the third ring. Bennett Legal, this is Marla. Hi, Ellie said quickly. I'm calling for Lucinda Hart. I'm her granddaughter. There was a pause. Then Lucinda Hart, as in Mrs. Hart from Eastwood Choir. Yes, Ellie said, she needs to speak to you. It's urgent. Marla didn't hesitate. Give her my private number. I'll see her this afternoon. At 2:30 p.m., Lucinda walked into a small office above a florist shop. The space was modest but elegant. Light wood floors, navy blue walls, and framed degrees from Columbia and NYU. Marla stood as Lucinda entered. The years had changed her, but the fire in her eyes was still there. Mrs. Hart, she said, smiling with genuine warmth. You look formidable. Lucinda smiled softly. I've had to be. They shook hands, sat. Lucinda opened her folder. I'm being gaslit, she said without preamble, by my own children. They're trying to take my house. They've already applied to have me institutionalized, and now they've fabricated my signature on a property transfer. Marla's face hardened. Do you have proof? Lucinda handed over the photos. The doctor's evaluations, the Blue Ridge Hills letter. I also have voice recordings, she added. Phone calls, voicemails, enough to start a timeline. Marla nodded slowly. This is serious, she said. You're not just dealing with greedy kids. You're looking at a premeditated campaign to erase your agency, and if that forged contract has been filed with a title office or escrow, we're on borrowed time. Lucinda sat straighter. What do I need to do? First, a legal injunction, Marla replied. It'll freeze any property transaction involving your name until we clarify ownership and consent. Second, I'll run that document through a forensic handwriting analyst. If we prove forgery, we press charges. Third, you prepare yourself. This may go public, and it's not going to be pretty. Lucinda met her gaze, then let it be ugly. I'm not ashamed to fight for my name, Marla smiled. That's the soprano I remember. Back at home that night, Ellie listened as Lucinda told her every word of the meeting. You're sure she'll help? Ellie asked. She already is, Lucinda said. The injunction will be filed first thing tomorrow. Ellie exhaled. So we're doing this. Yes, Lucinda said softly, we're doing this. Then after a pause, you've done more for me in 3 weeks than your mother has in 3 years. Ellie looked down. I never wanted it to be like this. Lucinda reached out and took her hand. Neither did I. In the quiet of that house, as the city buzzed beyond the windows and night settled over the trees, 2 women, one at the dawn of adulthood, the other at the edge of twilight, sat together at a wooden table cluttered with papers and records. One seeking justice, the other redemption, and somewhere between them a bond was forged not in blood but in truth, a bond strong enough to bring down anything pretending to be family. Marla Bennett didn't flinch when the forensic analyst's report came back. She simply slid the folder across her desk to Lucinda, tapping twice on the highlighted section. Signature bears evidence of digital manipulation inconsistent with organic handwriting flow, likely not signed by Lucinda A. Hart. Lucinda stared at the page. Her fingers didn't tremble, but her jaw clenched like she'd just bitten into a lemon and refused to show pain. It's official, Marla said, her voice low. It's a forgery. Lucinda exhaled slowly. So we have them. Marla raised a brow. We have one piece. It'll mean nothing without context. You need more. Verbal proof, a pattern of intent. Lucinda's gaze narrowed. You want them to incriminate themselves. I want them to underestimate you, Marla said, just like they always have. That Sunday afternoon, Lucinda invited Naomi over for tea. She made everything look natural. 2 mugs, some shortbread, the same blue cardigan Naomi once gave her 3 Christmases ago. But what Naomi didn't know was that every angle of that living room was now covered by discreet, motion-triggered cameras, installed by a tech friend of Marla's. Legal, silent, sharp. The doorbell rang. Naomi walked in like she owned the place. Smells like cinnamon, she said casually, slipping her purse off her shoulder. You're in a good mood. I had the oven on, Lucinda replied, voice light. It helps the house feel alive. Naomi didn't comment. She sat on the edge of the couch, legs crossed, eyes scanning the room like she was mentally measuring the square footage. Lucinda handed her a cup. I've been thinking, she began, about what you said the other day, about selling the house. Naomi looked up quickly, surprised. Oh, Lucinda nodded, forcing a smile. I suppose. Maybe it's time. You and Clark have always had good instincts. I don't want to be stubborn. Naomi leaned forward slightly. You're saying you're open to it. I might be, Lucinda said, lifting her cup to her lips. If I can be sure this is truly my decision. That pause, that flicker in Naomi's eye. Then the slip. Well, Naomi said, half smirking, we just wanted to get ahead of things. It's not like you'd be able to sign all that paperwork later on if, things progressed. Lucinda blinked. Progressed. You've been forgetful, Mom, Naomi said quickly. Clark and I thought it'd be smarter to make arrangements. You don't want strangers swooping in after. Lucinda tilted her head. But you forged my signature. Naomi's body went stiff. What are you talking about? I saw it, Lucinda said calmly. The contract, my name, my forged consent. Naomi's voice rose, defensive now. No one forged anything. You said it was fine. You just forgot. Did I? Lucinda's voice was a knife wrapped in lace. Or is that what you want to believe? There was silence, not long but enough. Enough to capture what Marla would later call implied confirmation, with clear indication of prior knowledge. Naomi stood abruptly, rattled. I have to go. I didn't come here for accusations. Lucinda didn't follow, didn't explain, just sat there sipping her tea while the camera near the bookshelf blinked twice, saving every word to the cloud. That night, Ellie made her own move. Naomi and Clark had arranged a video call, something about coordinating dates, documents, finalizing the timeline. Naomi didn't think twice when Ellie walked past her room. She was wearing earbuds, looked distracted. But Ellie had tucked her phone in her hoodie pocket. Voice recorder on, mic facing out. She lingered just long enough in the hallway, just enough to hear Naomi. I don't care what she suspects. As long as the papers go through before the review board meets, they won't undo it. The house becomes part of the care transfer, clean and legal. Clark. But if she fights it, Naomi, she won't. She's got no one. You know she's been babbling to Ellie lately. Little hints like she's playing detective. It's sad, really. Clark. And if Ellie figures it out, Naomi. She's a kid. She won't do anything. Ellie stopped recording at that sentence. She didn't cry. She didn't slam any doors. She walked straight into her grandmother's house that night and played the audio on speaker. Lucinda listened without blinking. When it ended, she simply said, they've signed their own verdict. Ellie looked at her. We have the video. We have the voice. What now? Lucinda stood, walked to her old piano dusty from neglect. She opened the lid, revealing not keys, but documents hidden beneath birth certificates, insurance tax returns. She added the flash drive and Ellie's phone. Then she closed it. Now, she said quietly, we go from playing defense to going on stage. Ellie finished. Lucinda smiled, faint and fierce. Marla received the files that same night. She didn't sleep. She reviewed every second, transcribed every word. By sunrise, she sent one message to Lucinda. We're ready. And just like that, decades of silence cracked. The wall was starting to crumble. And the truth, it wasn't whispering anymore. It was singing. Naomi had always prided herself on reading people. In courtrooms, charity galas, church basements, she could spot a lie from a twitch, a shift in breath, a glance too long. That was her gift. A learned talent sharpened through survival, divorce, and quiet manipulation. But lately, Ellie was unreadable. She didn't laugh as easily. She avoided direct eye contact. She double-checked her phone when Naomi entered a room, and worst of all, she'd stopped asking questions. That Tuesday evening, Naomi stood in the hallway just outside Ellie's bedroom door. The light was on. Inside, Ellie sat at her desk, earbuds in head bobbing gently to music. Or so Naomi thought. She knocked. Ellie flinched too hard. Naomi entered without waiting. I haven't seen you much this week, she said, keeping her voice casual. Everything okay with school? Ellie nodded, minimizing her screen quickly. Fine. Naomi scanned the room. Neat. Too neat. She eyed the corner where Ellie used to pile her sketchbooks. Gone. You know, Naomi added, Grandma mentioned you visited her again. A lot lately. Ellie shrugged. She's lonely. Naomi stepped closer. You sure that's all? Ellie turned, meeting her mother's gaze. What else would it be? Naomi smiled, but there was no warmth in it. The next day, Clark Hart filed a motion. It was stamped, notarized, and couriered directly to the county probate court, a petition for emergency guardianship of Lucinda A. Hart, citing cognitive decline and immediate concern for self-harm and financial exploitation. Attached to it was a one-page psychiatric evaluation typed, signed, sealed, claiming Lucinda exhibited signs of advanced memory decay, paranoia, and poor judgment regarding personal safety and asset management. It was dated 2 weeks prior. It was also entirely fake. The name on the letterhead belonged to a retired physician now living in Florida. The signature had been copied from a decade-old insurance claim. Clark never expected anyone to look too closely. He knew the judge overseeing emergency motions was notoriously overworked and often approved temporary guardianships pending final review. By filing it on a Thursday evening when the docket was light and the courthouse distracted, he hoped the order would slide through before anyone could object. It nearly did. Lucinda was in her garden when the letter arrived. The mailman handed it to her with a polite smile, unaware he had just delivered a ticking time bomb. She opened the envelope. Her eyes scanned the first lines. Then again, then again. Her hands dropped to her sides. She didn't say a word, just walked inside, found her phone, and called Marla. Marla drove faster than she had in years. When she arrived, she found Lucinda sitting at the piano bench, not playing, just staring at the keys like they were foreign. Lucinda handed over the letter. Marla read it once, twice, then pulled out her laptop, opened a private court database, and accessed the filing. Emergency hearings set for Monday morning, she muttered. Judge Holloway. If he signs this, they can invoke guardianship within 48 hours. Lucinda didn't look away from the keys. They're trying to erase me. They're trying to own you, Marla corrected. If this sticks, you lose access to your accounts, your house, your legal voice. Lucinda stood. Then let's remind them who I am. The plan was immediate. Step 1. Contest the motion before Monday, file an emergency objection, complete with evidence of competence, fraud, and coercion. Step 2. Expose the forged psychiatric letter. Marla's intern had already reached the real Dr. Alton in Sarasota, who confirmed he hadn't practiced in over 5 years. Step 3. Notify the media. Lucinda didn't flinch at that part. If they want to humiliate me publicly, she said, then they can stand in the light with me. That night she sat with Ellie in the kitchen. I need to ask you something, Lucinda said, and I need you to be brave. Ellie nodded. I need you to speak, on record, about what you heard, what you saw, and how they treated me. Ellie blinked, unsure. You mean like a statement? Like testimony, Lucinda said softly. Ellie hesitated. Then she reached for Lucinda's hand. I'll say everything. Friday morning, Marla filed the objection. She attached a recent cognitive test completed by a licensed doctor, recorded videos of Naomi's visit complete with her verbal slip, audio clips of Clark and Naomi conspiring, a notarized affidavit from Dr. Alton disavowing the diagnosis, and most powerfully she included a video statement from Ellie. My name is Ellie Hart, the girl said, sitting upright, voice clear. Lucinda Hart is my grandmother. I have never seen her forget who I am. I've never seen her confused, paranoid, or unsafe. What I have seen is my mother and uncle lie. I've seen them forge documents, manipulate conversations, and talk about putting her away just to take her house. I'm speaking because if I don't, I'm part of their silence. Saturday night, Naomi opened her email and nearly dropped her wine glass. Subject: fraudulent guardianship. Objection: urgent. From Marla Bennett-esque. She read the motion, read it again, then threw her phone onto the couch. Clark, she called on speaker, we have a problem. Clark groaned. What now? She filed an objection, with videos, with Ellie's statement. Clark cursed. She's going public, Naomi said, pacing. She's turning this into a spectacle. She wouldn't, Clark said. She's not a fighter. Naomi stopped. That's what we told ourselves, and that's where we screwed up. Sunday morning, Lucinda walked to church. She wore the same navy coat her husband had loved, the same pearls she'd worn to her son's graduation. Her steps were slow, but her spine was straight. People stared as she entered. Some smiled, others whispered. But Lucinda didn't flinch. She walked to the front pew, sat, and when the choir stood to sing, she didn't just join in, she led the alto section with a voice that hadn't forgotten how to rise. Later someone posted the clip online. Lucinda Hart, still singing, still standing. It went viral in 3 hours. That evening, Marla received confirmation the emergency hearing would proceed, but both sides had been granted equal time. Judge Holloway had read the materials and was alarmed enough to issue a temporary hold on all property transactions involving Lucinda's name. It wasn't a full victory, but it was a line in the sand, and across that line Naomi and Clark now stood exposed. Ellie saw them differently now. Not just as flawed adults, but as people who'd chosen convenience over family. And Lucinda had stopped waiting for dignity to be returned to her. She was now demanding it. It was raining the morning Lucinda Hart walked into the Jackson County Courthouse. Not a downpour, just that thin, needling rain that soaked through coats and left an ache behind your ears. The kind of rain meant to test resolve. Lucinda didn't flinch. She didn't hurry. She held an umbrella in one hand, a manila folder in the other, and wore her old emerald scarf, frayed, yes, but regal. Beside her, Marla walked with pace and precision. Her black heels clacked against the marble steps like a ticking metronome counting down to something irreversible. Are you ready? Marla asked. Lucinda didn't answer immediately. She looked up at the courthouse's cold gray stone, then said calmly, "I was born ready." But they forgot that. Courtroom 3A wasn't crowded, just the way Clark had hoped. A judge, 2 clerks, and a handful of family. Naomi sat stiff beside her brother, both avoiding Lucinda's eyes. Ellie sat 2 rows back, face pale but steady. Judge Holloway entered, an older man weary around the edges but sharp in his gaze. He glanced briefly at the docket, then raised an eyebrow. Emergency hearing, guardianship petition, and an emergency objection with exhibits. Quite a stack for a Monday. Marla stood. "Your Honor, we're requesting immediate dismissal of the motion with prejudice. My client, Mrs. Lucinda Hart, is not only of sound mind, she's been the target of an orchestrated scheme to strip her of her autonomy and estate." Clark muttered something. Naomi elbowed him. The judge looked over his glasses. "And you're alleging what exactly?" "Forgery, coercion, and fraudulent medical documentation filed by Mr. Clark Hart," Marla said, handing over a folder. "With your permission, I'd like to allow my client to speak." The judge hesitated. "You're saying a woman accused of diminished capacity wants to testify?" Marla nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, she insists." He sighed. "Very well, but I'll warn you the court has little patience for theatrics." Lucinda stood. She didn't walk to the center. Slowly, she moved like a woman who had sung on stages before strangers, who had taught stubborn tenors to breathe, who had raised 2 children on lullabies and conviction. When she spoke, her voice filled the room, not loud but precise, clear. "My name is Lucinda Adele Hart," she began. "I taught music at Westbriar High School for 32 years. I've sung in 5 languages. I've memorized full operas. I've helped students through grief, trauma, and joy with music as my guide." She looked directly at the judge. "And I stand here accused of forgetting." She opened her folder, took out a single sheet. "I would like to read to the court a passage from Bach's Cantata No. 147. The original German reads, Wohl mir, dass ich Jesum habe. Translated, it means, happy am I that I have Jesus." She paused. Each syllable in that phrase carries a weight. Wohl lifts mir, draws in, dass ich presses forward like a held breath. It's not just music, it's architecture. There was silence. Even Clark looked off balance. Lucinda smiled faintly. "Does that sound like the mind of a woman who's confused, Your Honor?" The judge didn't respond immediately. Marla approached the bench and handed over 2 documents. "Your Honor, attached you'll find an independent neurocognitive evaluation from Dr. Marion Teal dated last week, confirming Mrs. Hart's full competence, and a letter from Dr. Jonathan Alton disavowing the report submitted by the petitioner." He flipped through them slowly. His eyes narrowed at the signature on the forged letter. "Dr. Alton is retired," Marla added. "He's willing to testify by video call if necessary, but we believe the evidence speaks for itself." Naomi shifted in her seat. Clark turned red. Lucinda wasn't finished. "I also have audio recordings, Your Honor," she said, "of both my children discussing how to place me in a facility against my will, how to forge signatures, and how to sell my house." She nodded at Ellie. Ellie rose and pressed a small speaker. Clark's voice echoed across the courtroom. "She won't remember. She never does. Just sign it and mail it in." Naomi followed. "Once the guardianship's through, we can finally unload that old place. It's basically condemned anyway." The clip ended. No one breathed. Even the judge leaned back. Marla spoke softly. "These aren't just words, Your Honor. They are a pattern, a design. And this hearing is not about guardianship. It's about control, about theft, and about silencing a woman who refuses to disappear quietly." The judge looked at Lucinda. "Do you have anything else you'd like to say, Mrs. Hart?" Lucinda stepped forward once more. "I built that home with my husband, brick by brick. I raised children there, buried a marriage there, taught teenagers to find their voice in its living room." She turned to Clark and Naomi. "And I will not be erased from it." When she finished, the judge rubbed his chin in silence. "Then finally, I've seen many petitions like this, and most of them are justified. But this feels different." He looked directly at Clark. "I'm referring your motion and all supporting documents to the district attorney's office for further review. If I find evidence of forgery, perjury, or elder abuse, charges will follow." Clark's mouth opened, closed. Naomi whispered something under her breath. The judge turned back to Lucinda. As for your guardianship status, it remains solely in your hands. This court recognizes you as fully competent and fully in control of your estate. Lucinda exhaled. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, her hands felt warm, steady. Outside the courthouse, the rain had stopped. The clouds parted, weak sunlight breaking through like the shy beginning of spring. Marla walked beside her, carrying the folder, now smiling in her quiet way. Ellie ran ahead, turning back only once to make sure her grandmother was still there. Lucinda paused at the bottom of the courthouse steps. She looked up, not at the building, not at the press forming behind the barriers, but at the sky, and whispered, "We're not done yet." It was the kind of silence that stung. Inside courtroom 3A, the tension had curdled into something sharp and hot, like vinegar left too long in the sun. Naomi Hart sat at the witness stand with her palms flat on the wooden edge, her fingers twitching just slightly as she avoided her mother's eyes. Across the room, Lucinda sat still, her shoulders upright, her scarf pinned perfectly at her throat, like a brooch of dignity. Ellie watched from the gallery, her heart pounding so loud she felt it in her throat. Judge Holloway leaned forward. "Mrs. Naomi Hart, please answer the question directly. Did you or did you not file this guardianship petition on the basis of a psychological report you personally submitted?" Naomi blinked rapidly. I filed the petition, yes, but I didn't fabricate the report. It was given to me." "By whom?" Marla's voice cut clean across the courtroom. Naomi hesitated. "My brother, Clark, sent it to me." Clark, seated with an air of false calm behind his attorney, didn't flinch. Marla turned to the judge. "We request Clark Hart be recalled for immediate testimony following this witness." The judge nodded. "So ordered. Continue." Naomi shifted in her seat. She looked smaller now, like a woman unraveling by the thread. "I didn't know it was fake. I swear. I was told Mom was forgetting things, that she left the oven on, that she once called the mailman by Dad's name." Lucinda didn't move, but her eyes glistened. Marla stepped forward, hands clasped behind her back. "Mrs. Hart, were you aware that your mother had been evaluated by a licensed psychiatrist less than 2 weeks ago?" Naomi faltered. "No." "So you admit to filing a petition without current medical documentation?" Naomi's mouth opened closed. She looked to Clark, who stared straight ahead, stone. "Mrs. Hart," Judge Holloway said firmly, "the court does not take lightly the exploitation of legal mechanisms for personal gain." Naomi shrunk back. "I thought she was slipping. I thought she needed care." Marla turned to the projector screen. "Your Honor, we'd like to present Exhibit D, a scanned copy of the real estate transfer agreement allegedly signed by Mrs. Lucinda Hart." The screen lit up. There it was, the cursive name slanted and neat, Lucinda Hart. "We've had this signature evaluated by an expert in forensic handwriting analysis," Marla continued. "The conclusion is unequivocal. The signature is a fabrication. A digital scan and paste job clipped from a 1998 recital permission slip and layered onto this form." Gasps broke from the gallery. Judge Holloway's eyebrows arched. "Do you have the analyst's report?" "Yes, Your Honor, certified and notarized." She handed it over. "So," the judge said slowly, "we are now not only dealing with a contested guardianship, but also potential felony-level document fraud." Naomi looked to Clark again. Marla's eyes narrowed. "Your Honor, I request the court's permission to treat Mrs. Hart as a hostile witness." "Granted." Marla turned back. "Mrs. Hart, did you know about the attempt to sell your mother's house before the petition was filed?" Naomi's voice dropped. "No. We have phone transcripts that say otherwise. You discussed closing dates." Naomi closed her eyes. Her face was crumpling. "Why?" Marla asked, voice softening, not accusatory, just tired. "Why would you do this to your own mother?" A long pause. And then Naomi whispered, "Because I was tired. Tired of taking care of everyone. Tired of going over there hearing her talk about Dad like he just died. Tired of pretending we were still a family." Lucinda's breath hitched. Naomi turned finally to look at her mother. "You don't understand what it's like being the one left behind to hold the pieces together. You just kept singing and teaching and mourning, and we were supposed to be okay with that." Clark stood abruptly. "That's enough." Judge Holloway slammed the gavel. "Mr. Hart, sit down." He did, but not before glaring at Naomi. Marla stepped aside as Naomi was dismissed. Lucinda sat unmoved, but her hands had clenched slightly on her lap. "Call Clark Hart to the stand," the judge ordered. And in that moment the courtroom felt less like a place of law and more like a theater with the next act about to begin. The courtroom had never felt more alive or more divided. As the final gavel of the day prepared to fall, Judge Holloway cleared his throat and glanced over the rim of his glasses. The air was still thick from the fallout of Naomi's testimony, from the quiet but undeniable collapse of her narrative, and from the mounting weight of evidence Marla had unfolded piece by piece. Now, with Clark Hart on the stand, squirming and combative, the final threads of the case had unraveled. The moment had come. Judge Holloway's voice rang out steady and deliberate. "The court finds that Mrs. Lucinda Hart is of sound mind and fully capable of managing her own affairs. The guardianship petition is hereby dismissed with prejudice." Lucinda exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Ellie gripped the edge of her seat, her knuckles white eyes wide. The judge continued, this time with sharper tone. "Furthermore, based on the presented evidence, including falsified medical records and forged legal documentation, this court is ordering a criminal investigation into Mr. Clark Hart and Mrs. Naomi Hart for potential fraud, perjury, and conspiracy to defraud." A hush fell over the courtroom. Naomi looked as though she'd been struck. Clark's face went rigid, jaw tight. Eyes narrowed like a predator trapped in its own snare. "Court is adjourned." The gavel fell. The gallery erupted into hushed murmurs. Some gasped. A few spectators clapped softly before realizing this was still a courtroom, not a theater. But Lucinda didn't hear them. She sat unmoving, staring at the bench where her daughter had just crumbled and where her son had seethed. Outside the courthouse, the reporters were waiting. By morning, headlines were everywhere. "Beloved retired music teacher. Exonerated in shocking family betrayal case. Lucinda Hart. Vindicated local icon. Outsmarts conspiracy by her own children." One article in the Hillcrest Gazette went viral in the region. "A woman with a voice. Lucinda Hart, former vocal teacher to hundreds, silences the lies with a final aria of truth." Lucinda didn't speak to reporters that day. She didn't need to. Her story had been told in full, and now it belonged to the public and to justice. Naomi, humiliated, was placed on immediate suspension from the Hillcrest School Board. Her face, once a fixture of PTA fundraisers and community events, became synonymous with betrayal and disgrace. Parents who once shook her hand now pulled away. Clark's situation turned darker. The district attorney filed formal charges: 2 counts of document forgery, 1 count of conspiracy to defraud, and obstruction of justice. His home was searched, his computers seized. By week's end, he was arraigned in the very same courthouse he had once tried to manipulate. At home, Lucinda walked back into her red brick house with a slow, thoughtful gait. The house had never felt more like hers. The sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting golden warmth across the piano bench. Ellie was already inside, organizing the music sheets that had sat dormant for months. "You should give a concert," Ellie said, looking up from the piano. Lucinda smiled. "I think I'd rather teach." A month later, flyers appeared around Hillcrest. Free vocal lessons for local youth. Saturdays at Miss Lucinda's. Her house, once nearly stolen, became a sanctuary again. Every weekend, no vang lên tiếng luyện thanh và tiếng cười. Voices in every stage of bloom. Children from the neighborhood, many from underprivileged homes, lined up with nervous excitement and left with music in their bones. Lucinda never spoke ill of Naomi or Clark again, not in public, not in private. When asked, she simply said, "Some walls collapse not to destroy us, but to show us what sunlight really looks like." And from then on, the brick walls of her home no longer echoed with silence, but with song. The days that followed the court ruling were not filled with celebration, but with silence, a kind of sacred quiet that Lucinda hadn't felt in years. The phone calls from curious acquaintances, the emails from old students, the knocks at her door, all politely declined. She needed space. She needed time, not to grieve, but to breathe. Ellie sat across from her at the kitchen table one morning, the same table where years ago Lucinda had taught her the difference between legato and staccato. The sunlight caught the side of Lucinda's face, tracing the delicate lines that mapped her lifelines etched by laughter, sorrow, wisdom. "You could sue them," Ellie said quietly, her voice edged with protective fire. "You could go after everything they tried to take." Lucinda looked out the window. A cardinal landed on the sill, fluffed its feathers, and took off again. She exhaled slowly. "No," she said, "no more courts, no more lawyers. I've already won what mattered. But I won't carry more hatred in my blood." Lucinda interrupted, her voice soft but unwavering. "Justice isn't vengeance. What they lose now they'll feel every day they walk by this house and hear it filled with music again." She stood up, and it's time this house sang again. That afternoon she opened the door to the old guest room, once Naomi's childhood bedroom, later used for storage, later still nearly cleared out by movers hired for a sale she never agreed to. Dust particles danced in the light. The closet still smelled faintly of cedar and old sheet music. She dragged out the upright piano she had tucked in the corner, covered in a drop cloth. She ran her fingers over the keys. The notes rang out a little flat. It didn't matter. She turned to Ellie. "Think we can turn this into a classroom?" Ellie beamed. "We're already late." Flyers went up by the weekend, printed at the local copy shop with big bold letters. Free vocal lessons, Saturdays at Miss Lucinda's, ages 6 to 16, no cost, just a voice and a heart. Children from across Hillcrest came. Some shy, some bursting with noise. Some had never touched a piano. Some had never sung outside a shower. The first class was a sunny morning. Ellie stood by the window checking names off a clipboard, her handwriting neat and decisive. Lucinda had pulled back all the curtains, letting the light flood the room that had once been shadowed by betrayal. She wore a powder blue shawl and a silver hairpin shaped like a treble clef. 7 children sat cross-legged on the floor. The youngest was 6, the oldest a boy of 15 who said his mother had once studied under Lucinda. Lucinda took a breath and stepped forward. No stage, no spotlight, just her voice. "Before we sing," she began, "I want you to know something. Music doesn't belong to those with money or fame or perfect pitch. Music belongs to the brave, to those who feel deeply, to those who don't always have the words. And here in this house you're allowed to be brave." She sat down at the piano and struck the first chord, C major, warm, familiar. Then she sang a lullaby in Latin, a piece once used in a cathedral choir. It spoke of protection, of light, of finding your way home. Her voice trembled slightly at first, then soared clear, controlled, filled with something deeper than skill. The children sat still, wide-eyed. One girl teared up. Ellie watched them all, her own eyes glistening. After the final note, faded silence hung thick, but it wasn't hollow, it was reverent. Then a little boy in the front row clapped. Others followed. Lucinda chuckled softly. That wasn't the lesson she teased. That was just the invitation. Over the weeks, the class grew. Word spread. Neighbors offered to bring snacks. A retired cellist dropped off sheet music. A shy girl who barely spoke began harmonizing. Lucinda taught them breathing, phrasing, posture, but she also taught them about grace, about forgiveness, about choosing to create rather than destroy. Every Saturday morning, her house filled with the sound of scales, giggles, the occasional off-key squeal and joy. Sometimes, while tidying up after a session, Lucinda would find a forgotten scarf or crumpled lyric sheet and smile. This mess belonged to the future. And on her front porch, Ellie began a new habit, writing one phrase every week on a chalkboard easel. The first one read, "A voice can break walls." Lucinda never commented on them, but every Saturday she'd glance at it before stepping into her new purpose. And not once, not ever, did she look back with bitterness, because the house that almost became a prison had been reborn as a sanctuary, not through revenge, but through music. The auditorium was quiet before the final performance. The kind of quiet that comes not from absence of noise, but from collective breath being held. The soft rustle of programs folding, the occasional cough, and the hum of anticipation filled the room. The final names were being announced: Lucinda Hart and Ellie Carver, grandmother and granddaughter, about to sing together. Backstage. Lucinda stood tall, though her knees felt like paper. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for Ellie's. The girl squeezed it back, steady, fearless. "Are you ready?" Lucinda whispered. Ellie smiled. "We were born ready." As they stepped onto the stage, Naomi sat hidden in the shadows of the back row. She wore a plain coat hood, pulled low, hands clenched. She hadn't come to be seen. She had come to see. The piano chords began soft, haunting, familiar Ave Maria. Lucinda's voice entered first low, seasoned like weathered oak. Ellie followed light, pure breeze through stained glass. The harmony between them was not just musical, it was generational. It was a bridge built from ashes. The audience was still. Some held hands. Others wiped silent tears. A little girl leaned on her mother's shoulder and whispered, "She sounds like a story." From the back, Naomi's lips trembled. Her daughter. Her daughter was up there singing not for her, but for something beyond blame, for healing, for truth, for... Lucinda's eyes scanned the front rows, but eventually they settled on the back, on Naomi. She held her gaze not with anger, not with triumph, but with peace. A peace hard-earned, a peace that said, "You do not own me, and I do not need revenge to be free." When the final note faded, the room remained silent for a breathless moment. Then a surge of applause rose like a tide. People stood. Strangers cheered. And Lucinda, still holding Ellie's hand, nodded, once grateful not for the applause, but for the silence that had finally lifted. Backstage later, Ellie asked, "Do you think she saw us?" Lucinda didn't answer at first. She unpinned the silver treble clef brooch from her shawl and handed it to Ellie. "She heard us," Lucinda said. "That's enough." Weeks passed. The house became louder again, not with argument, but with music. The Saturday classes grew. Children filled the halls with piano scales, mispronounced Italian, and laughter. Ellie handled registration. Lucinda taught them to sing, not to be perfect, but to be brave. One afternoon, a small envelope arrived. No name, no return address. Inside was a single pressed lily, and a note. "Thank you for not destroying me when you could have. I see it now, N." Lucinda read it once, then tucked it in the back of a hymnal. Not to keep it close, but to let it rest. She didn't write back. She didn't need to. The final scene. A new Saturday morning. The sun spills through the front windows. A girl around 10, shy, holding a folder of songs she wrote herself, stands at the threshold of the classroom. Lucinda looks up from the piano and smiles. "Come in," she says. "There's always room for one more voice." And in that moment the house sings again. Not just with music, but with forgiveness.